Thanks, Bob. Yeah, and thank you for attending. This is something myself that I've been around my whole life. My father was somebody in a wheelchair. He was a strong advocate, so it's nice to see something like this happening, and we're making some progress. It's been a long time. So again, the 5 stations have already been talked about. I just wanted to show you some images relating to each of the 5 stations, just to kind of get your own thoughts thinking, or your own thoughts going. One of the things I want to make sure people are clear on is that when we talk about accessibility or universal design, we're talking about as many people as possible. So we're not talking about a specific disability, but any kind of disability that's out there. A way I've heard it referred to is 8 to 80. So when we design and plan, we try to design in such a way that it's as accommodating to somebody who's 8 as it is to somebody who's 80. And of course, everybody in between. The funny thing about me is my holiday photos are quite different than a lot of people's. So this is in New York, and I just thought, well, that's interesting. So there's an actual place for somebody in a wheelchair, so you're not allowed to stand there. This was a study I did in Edmonton, but we were looking at making a bus stop area accessible to people who are blind, not with low vision, but actually blind. And we created a situation where we would use a lot of color and texture contrast that would allow somebody using a cane, for example, or their feet, they could feel the different textures and start to find their way to the actual bus stop itself. Again, pedestrian pathways, we want to make them wide, level, non-slip, but we also need to make them friendly for people with other disabilities, especially people who do use canes, people with low vision. This was actually in San Diego near a children's museum, and this is a crosswalk. You can see the yellow tactile truncated domes. Not only that, as soon as somebody passes the 2 white pillars on each side of the yellow truncated domes, sensors go off, and then in the roadway, there's little circles in the roadway, and they light up. And the intersection, or that pathway, is actually raised, so it sort of forces the cars to slow down. But it's quite the thing, and it makes it really, really safe for children who would be using this quite frequently. And this is something we don't see in Canada very often, but it's tactile pathways. So there's the round, what we call truncated domes. So those are the squares that you see. And that tells you that you need to stop or change direction. But then you can see the other tactile tiles that are more rectangular, and they're directional. So they tell you to go in a certain direction. So this is used quite a bit most exclusively in Japan, interestingly enough. But I've seen it in South Africa and Holland. When it comes to public buildings, there is the barrier-free design guide, the Alberta Building Code. We have to remember and remind ourselves that that is the bare minimum. When we meet the building code, we're just meeting a very minimal standard. And we know that there's a lot more complexities out there that we need to try to accommodate. Something I learned a little later in life, my dad moved from driving a car, and he could transfer from his wheelchair into a car, and he could use the standard accessible stall, which is 12 feet wide. But later in life, he had trouble getting in and out of the car, so he used a van. A wheelchair accessible van needs about 15 feet. So these 2 parking stalls with the middle portion is a transfer zone. So somebody in a wheelchair accessible van could actually use that zone to transfer out of the van. So this is taking 2 regular stalls and turning it into a situation where it makes it also van accessible. And this is the Rick Hansen Center, an interior view of the Rick Hansen Center in Vancouver. And you can get to from the main floor to the third floor through a ramp system. There are elevators, but the ramp system does allow you to at least gain access to those 3 floors, so it just makes movement a lot easier. And this is the only time I've ever seen an elevator like this, but from about 3 feet to the ground are the push buttons, so they're really long push buttons. So you could, if you were in a wheelchair, you could actually just hit it with your feet, or anybody else could just tap it with their hands or kick it, maybe not kick it. But this is also in the Rick Hansen Center. Bathrooms. This has a color contrasting border in the bathroom, which allows somebody with low vision to appreciate the size of the room. And the grab bar on the wall is the one that's required by the Alberta Building Code. The flip down grab bar on the other side of the toilet stall is one that is, again, over and above what would normally be asked for. And in my time, as an architect over 20 years now, I used to get asked, how much is that grab bar? And I'd say, well, about $200. Oh, well, we could save that money. Today, they don't question that. So again, it's nice to see there's a different way of thinking. This is a situation that has a bar at a public sink countertop. But what I learned is that people in wheelchairs like to be able to wash their hands and dry their hands before they touch the wheels of their wheelchair again. So this is not demanded by code or required by code, but here's a situation where you could get underneath the sink, wash your hands, grab the paper towel, and get rid of the paper towel in the garbage before ever having to touch the wheels of your wheelchair again. Rec centers. So here's an entrance to a rec center in Edmonton that I worked on, and you can see that again the area for the cars, it's raised, so there are actually no curb cuts for the pathway system. And we created what we call a shoreline, so it's a color and texture contrasting material that allows somebody who is blind and uses a cane to stay on the pathway. And certainly something I've noticed in airports and recreation centers is, well, maybe one of the greatest inventions made in my time, wheels on a bag. And so most airports now don't even put stairs. We all have bags with wheels on them now. So it's happened in recreation centers with hockey, where all the kids and the coaches have their bags now with wheels. So these ramps are much, much bigger than required, but they recognize that they're so valuable to moving people around quickly and efficiently. And making sure we have ramping systems to get into our swimming pools as well. And then in outdoor spaces, again, with our aging population, we're going to see a situation where more and more grandparents are going out and spending time with their grandkids. So we want to think about that 8 to 80. And so here's a situation, a sand pit area where there's an area that's open underneath and a child in a wheelchair could actually play in the sand. And we should never forget that we can make all the playground equipment as accessible as possible as well. So that gets us to the point where we can start manning the stations. And I don't know if we want to answer any questions right now.
It's for art, so what's going on?
Or you just want to go to the stations and fill out post notes? Okay, sounds good.
Oh, great.
I'll let you